मानुषी के मित्रों को मेरा नमस्कार। वेलकम टू दिस एडिशन ऑफ मानुषी संवाद। तो आज का टॉपिक आप देख ही रहे हैं कि ये साउथ एशियन आइडेंटिटी जो है, ये किस तरह इसका इस्तेमाल वेस्टर्न एकेडेमिया में हिंदुओं की आवाज को गैग करने के लिए इस्तेमाल किया जाता है। कोई अब वहाँ इंडियन स्टडीज डिपार्टमेंट नहीं होंगे, वो किसी जमाने में हुआ करते थे। अभी साउथ एशियन स्टडीज, और उसी रूब्रिक के अंडर हम सबको डाल दिया गया, घुसेड़ दिया गया, जिसमें मालदीव्स भी आता है, पाकिस्तान भी आता है, बांग्लादेश भी आता है। इंडिया डजंट इमर्ज एज अ डिस्टिंक्ट आइडेंटिटी। और इस सवाल पे चर्चा करने के लिए और इसके इम्प्लीकेशंस कितने भीषण हैं, इस पर चर्चा करने के लिए हमारे साथ दो खास मेहमान हैं। एक तो राघव जगन्नाथन जी, editor of Swarajya. Welcome, Jaggi. That's how all your friends call you.
Thank you, Madhu ji.
Yeah, and then we have Dr. Gautam Sen. In fact, I picked up this topic from an email conversation that was going on between a small group of concerned friends and scholars. और उसमें कुछ बातें डॉक्टर गौतम सेन ने कही और फिर जगी ने उसका रिस्पॉन्स किया। तो मुझे लगा कि ये बहुत अहम बात है, और क्योंकि इस बात पर मुझे भी कई सालों से, डेकेड से खुंदक बनी हुई थी, तो जब इन दोनों ने, गौतम दा ने और जगी ने, ये सवाल उठाया, तो मुझे लगा कि इसकी अहमियत समझाने के लिए एक विशेष प्रोग्राम करना बहुत जरूरी है। Both of you are well versed with what's happening in Western academia. But before we come on to that topic, may I, with your permission, take a slight detour to start with? Just as this whole business of South Asian identity has bugged many of us, and in our small ways we have expressed our dissatisfaction and anger at it, another thing that bothers me, and I'd like both of you to comment on it, which is Indians or Hindus, I would say, seem to be the only group that go to Western universities, to American universities, to Britain, to Australia, Germany, wherever they go, और हमेशा वो केवल इंडिया पे बात करेंगे, उसकी एक्सपर्टीज करेंगे। मैंने आज तक नहीं देखा कि कोई हमारा इंडियन यानी स्पेशली हिंदू स्कॉलर वहां जाके अमेरिकन स्टडीज में स्पेशलाइज करे, जर्मन स्टडीज में स्पेशलाइज करे। मुझे कभी नहीं समझ आया वेदर इट्स आर आशुतोष वार्ष्णे और गायत्री स्पिवाक और प्रताप भानु मेहता. Jaggi, I can't make sense of it. Why do they have to go 12,000 miles to angst about India? अच्छा, angst about India, is it because as younger scholars मुझे मालूम है कि अगर आप कहो कि मैं say a feminist who wants to go and study American women's problems, the ghettoization of XYZ group in America, they just won't give you admission. That's how arrogant it is, that they don't think as an Indian you're capable of understanding, and leave alone commenting on their society. I can understand for younger scholars, but what about the Ashutosh Varshnais who've reached a certain pinnacle, or even Amartya Sen, and all these biggies? I cannot for the life of me understand. If you have to angst about India, तो भी हिंदुस्तान में रहो ना, वहां जाके क्यों रोना रोते हो? अच्छा, दूसरा इसी से जुड़ा सवाल है, गौतम दा, you would be also, I'm sure, much bothered about this. I've never seen this in American universities or anywhere, in Oxford, Cambridge, anywhere, कि Chinese scholars वहां जाके या जापानीज स्कॉलर्स वहां जाके या थाई स्कॉलर्स या पाकिस्तानी भी वहां जाके केवल अपने देश को पाकिस्तानी स्कॉलर वहां इस्लाम को बैशिंग करने नहीं जाते वहां, बल्कि इस्लाम की घुसपैठ करने जाते हैं to create more space for it. Similarly, a Thai scholar or a Chinese scholar is not likely to go there to do China bashing. Um, how is it that only and only Indians, and that to only Hindus? Because Indian Muslims will never go there to do Islam bashing or Indian Muslim bashing. They also will join in Hindu bashing, India bashing, but not. So the two seem to me to be related. How is it that they pick native informants among us and then train them and shape them into being Hindu bashers come India bashers? Yeah. Who would like to start? Jaggi, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, this seems very obvious to me that we trying to go there and we think that we are going to study there. But one of the conditions we find many of Indians who go there for studies or is that they get better deals. They make scholarships, part-time, partial fees, remissions, and other things, provided they focus on these kind of studies. If you actually see, there is no Indian bureaucrat or politician whose son or daughter is not studying abroad, and all of them get through not because they are suddenly brilliant scholars and they've been asked to do anything there, but because they by influence in India that way by giving them admissions to Ivy League universities, and they seem to be able to. Uh, I think I think it's a more a reflection on us that we want to go there and study how to become more self-loathing Hindus rather than study something that's more useful about their community or anything else. So I think it's more a comment on us than on them. So they find that we are more than eager to demolish ourselves. I think 1,000 years of colonialism, which we have been subjected to, have made us more vulnerable to the idea that there must be something wrong with us, whereas what others think about us must be right. And this attitude, the attitude of the sepoy, the attitude of uh, being self-loathing, has been so deeply inculcated in us that we find it very easy to take up these things when we go to study abroad, because it gives us a easy entry. Your career gets advanced and all kinds of things. And I see the consistent pattern in this. I mean, recently, I think just 2 years ago, a group was formed in America called Hindus for Human Rights. Okay. Now, these have only self loathing Hindus among them, and the only rights they're concerned about is about Dalit rights, which is fine. I am also concerned about it. We want to do something about it. But they have never fought for any Hindu rights outside this sharp fault line, which they think they must exploit and say this is the only human right we should be concerned about. They never talked about what happens in Bangladesh or Pakistan or anywhere where Hindu rights are mortgaged. They have never spoken when something racist happens in the US, and when our temples are defaced in the US by the likes of Christian evangelists and others. But when it comes to Hindu human rights, they only talk about pluralism and how we have become Muslim hating bigots, how we treat Dalits. This is the only topic for them as far as in. So they have managed to create a schism even within Hindus there into two different things. And I think looks like it is working because we are allowing this to happen.
No, I agree with you, Jaggi, because our own school system, our own school curriculum, college curriculum is training us to go in that direction. So they already go prepared and they are well formed. But I do know, and maybe Gautam Da can substantiate this, I do know that the few who wish to go and study, for example, they want to go study American history or American politics and economy or German politics and economy, are not allowed to do that. They're kept out. Even for example, comparative studies of feminist upsurge in India and Europe. I cannot think of even one leading feminist who's done that study despite staying there a whole lifetime. They all keep on nitpicking about women in India and all that is wrong here. And to my mind, it's both because A, doors are shut. you will not be allowed and you're not taken seriously. And even an Amartya Sen, I don't think will be taken as seriously if he were to talk about Indian American polity or British polity, as he is when he badmouths Indian polity and especially Hindus. So I think it's doors are shut and rewards are big if you join the brigade. What do you say about it, Gautam Da? You've spent a whole lifetime there.
Well, I think the story is a little bit more complicated, but as an aside, let me tell you about an anecdote. When Amartya Sen commented on China's great leap forward famine, he was criticized by none other than Professor Utsa Patnaik of JNU. How dare you? And there's another episode I'm familiar with where an Indian wanted to study the anthropology of Holland and Belgium, and he was denied the opportunity. He didn't want to work in India. But let me enlarge the debate a little bit. We are really talking about the social and human sciences. We're not talking about Indian science scholars. So we are talking mainly about social scientists and human scientists, because the science Indians do in large numbers is universal science. So let me, in fairness, not tar them with the same brush. And in fact, that is a genuinely capable lot, because they have to compete internationally with their peers everywhere, whereas our people are competing with each other. Now, it's not entirely true 100% that they only talk about India, because if you do English literature, of course, you are doing English literature. And a lot of the scholars who go to Oxford and Harvard do actually study English, whether it's Supriya Chaudhary or Homi Bhabha, they are doing English. So in that sense, they're engaged in something which is a little bit more universal. We are really talking about mainly three fields of study: history, anthropology, and sociology.
Yes.
In which people end up specializing on India. Now, there is, of course, an occasional exception. For example, Sanjay Subramaniam has written an important book on the Portuguese Empire. He has also written about global history, which actually transcends the narrow confines of India. So there are exceptions, but I think these are exceptions to the rule which Jaggi correctly and you point out. But I think, we need to have a deeper understanding of where this comes from. Some of this has now been provided by that brilliant piece of work, which has been reviewed very carefully in Swarajya, that is Sai Deepak's work. What is it that motivates us to behave in this self-destructive way? But beyond that, I would say this, that we should get a bit realistic. I hate to have to admit, I've lived almost 51 years, more or less, abroad, though in India constantly, particularly since 2006. I myself actually taught international political economy, and one of my areas of specialization was American foreign and economic policy, not India. I came to that much later out of interest in an amateurish way, but I never taught anything on India. So obviously, I'm in a minority. I also, of course, was a specialist on British foreign policy because I lived here and I couldn't help but become knowledgeable. But that's just an aside. We need to understand that universities in Europe, Britain, and the United States are really well and truly a part of the establishment. They are institutionalized into the system. They are part of the policy-making network. May not be directly in many cases, but indeed in some cases directly, where individual academics are recruited full-time as in the office of the State Department, the White House, or they are consultants. They come in and out. So what is happening in the universities is actually an aspect at some remove of state policy. And their use of Indian scholars and from other countries, including, say, Sri Lanka and elsewhere, even Pakistan to some extent, is that these people are informants. They are collecting data and information to allow the foreign chancelleries of these countries to better understand our society historically in depth, in detail. It is the same kind of work which is done by Google, by Amazon, which collects massive data. In fact, the academic world is going to be less and less important because Amazon, Google, and Apple will have much more information. In fact, real-time information. They won't have to wait for the last census 7 years ago. They'll have real-time information. They'll have real-time information which our people in India and Delhi in government won't have. So that will be shared immediately with the intelligence services, the foreign ministries. So our scholars, whether they are aware of it or not, are actually simply informants in the way British administrators were in the 19th century to collect data. For example, the 1872 census was the first census of India, which basically invented the caste system we have today. There was no such thing as the caste we know today until that census. So they created not only information, but they used that to create a narrative. Then the other important census was 1931, the caste census, which created the entire caste miasma, fiasco that we live through daily, the madness of which I see on television every day in Uttar Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Punjab. This insanity was the work of informants who allowed the creation of a narrative. But I would like to go even one step further behind to understand the context before I come to the unfolding and continuing reality today. The context is this. In the 1857 mutiny, a disproportionate number of the mutineers from Bengal on behalf of Brahmins. And that is when the British realized that we have to create a narrative to discredit this social class, which is intellectually the most dominant and quickest on the uptake, which is why they always hated the Chitpavans and the Brahmins most of all in the 20th century, because they were quick on the uptake. Now, following this, the Wahhabis were sponsored indirectly, quietly in 1863. The Ahmadiyyas were sponsored in the 1880s. So they were creating an entire narrative. And this narrative is repeated now without pause in many guises. And this narrative is very simply, there is a religion called Hinduism, which is the religion of these oppressive Brahmins who propagate this false idea about the divinity. And it is the Brahmins. And the divisions were intended to separate the intellectual class from everybody else. Now, Brahmins, of course, had been killed and enslaved in huge numbers before the British came. The British delivered the coup d'etat of intellectually discrediting them. And Punjab is a wonderful case study where almost every Punjabi I meet will tell you how they have been oppressed by the Brahmins, which is why intellectual life is so weak in the Punjab. Very intelligent people, but they have very little intellectual tradition anymore because the British realized the Brahmins were going to be the problem. That is something that spread. Now, if you read even Narendra Singh Sarila on the Great Game, the partition, even that, you will find Churchill constantly cursing the Congress party as a Hindu party, by which he meant these oppressive Brahmins, and we are going to be stopped from looking after the lower orders of India, the Dalits, etc. So this is a refrain. Now, this refrain has become the dominant ideology, not just abroad, but the dominant ideology of our civilization, which again, Sai has been the first to systematically try to put together in one set of colors. There is a lot of work on this already, but Sai has done a brilliant job on this. Now, this narrative is a narrative we pick up. Now, let me jump to the contemporary period. You are doing a degree in Oxford in PPE, which is basically a glorified set of A-levels, because you learn nothing. But the people who do that already have a career because of their background and their parents. They don't need anything more than a stamp. The real challenge comes when you do research. You apply from India to say you want to study British medieval history. I'm sorry, you won't get admission. You apply for a scholarship, you won't get it. But you say, I'm going to study this subcaste in Tamil Nadu, and their dire fate, they look at you very sympathetically. Or you say, I'm going to look at the human rights of tribals, women's oppression, every fracture in Indian society, they will allow you to study because this is what justifies you as an informant. They are understanding what are the bell switches to pull to manipulate Indian society. And Indian society is the most open and vulnerable because of its democracy, its constitution, our history. Very easy to manipulate without actually invading it. Invading India is trouble. They will have a hard time. Indian armed forces are trained to fight to the finish. So they don't want to do that. It is much easier to influence. Now everybody's in this game. Now this game, please, viewers understand, is played by the state. It is the state which plays this game. It is nobody else. The church is an accessory. The church has its own agenda and is delighted to play this game because they have been trying since 1812 when their role was legitimated. But they hardly converted 50,000 people in the 19th century. But the church has always wanted to do this. And in the 21st century, what has happened, if you read the wonderful studies on evangelists in America, there are some absolutely first-class studies, and I'm reading them constantly. Their influence in American politics waned. They stopped getting invitations to the White House. First with Clinton and then with Obama. The days of Billy Graham and the powerful evangelists who wanted to push anti-abortion and many other policies failed. But the thing which did not fail is the coincidence of the evangelist's desire to work abroad and the state to use it to create a constituency abroad. A constituency which will rise to the challenge in Kuntakulam and stop a project, which will rise to the challenge and stop 40% of India's copper production. So the church and the state work together, but the state is in the saddle. But there is a wonderful study from 2012, which I have in my library at home, which says US foreign policy and the evangelists. And in the outset, I should say the evangelists were the only people who knew the languages and the local society, and they used to train foreign service officers. Foreign service officers in America used to go to the School of Oriental and African Studies to study under Wendy Doniger. They were learning languages. When I used to visit the library, I used to meet CIA agents learning Urdu. So this is all a network of the universities and the state. And I'm afraid India has a very simple problem. Amongst many, there's one simple economic problem. The supply of things people want is very small in relation to the demand. Though it has changed a little bit, as India's economy has tripled in size from 1992 to now, still we have a huge problem, undersupply of every kind of reward and goodies. And the demand for that has grown and grown. So it is very easy to buy Indians because they think, what good will it do for me to behave like an honorable person when everybody else is behaving dishonorably? So my bad behavior will be a private gain for me, my family, my children, and it won't affect the overall situation because everybody else is sinking the boat anyway. So Indians are extremely vulnerable. By contrast, the Chinese are deeply nationalist. You read any history of China in the 20th century, the most important part of Chinese persona is their nationalism, their bitter hatred of the Opium Wars. The Taipan Rebellion in the 19th century, where up to 70 million Chinese died. Did you know 70 million almost in the 19th century, apart from the 50, 60 million Mao killed, even more in the 20th. So the Chinese are insulated, they're inoculated against this kind of subversion, which is not to say they don't spy and they don't retreat, but they're not like us. Because I can tell you, sitting here, because I taught in the US in Massachusetts as well, I can count in two hands the number of academics in the social sciences who speak for India. Jaggi, you know them all. One is sitting in San Francisco.
Yeah.
The other one has written a fabulous political history of the partition.
Yeah.
I know maybe one other.
Yeah.
I only know two in England.
Why not name the good ones?
I think, the reason I don't name him is this poor man who has done such outstanding work, and he's a scholar of exceptional skill. The moment he went to launch his book in the World Hindu Congress, all the people withdrew from participation in his official seminars. They made his life miserable. Now, the only reason he survives is by the fact that he is so damn good, they can't quite finish him off.
Yeah.
So I don't name him only for that reason. Only for that reason.
No, but they've already, look, I know, Jackie knows who you're talking about. The point is that damage is done. He's taken the beating. Why not name it?
I agree with you, Madhu, but he has some reservations, and I consider him a very dear friend whose fate is even more important to me than mine right now, because he will do the work to change the course of the writing of Indian history, and I wait his next work. So that's why I won't name him. I understand what you're saying. So my argument is this: you will never be allowed to do any work, and you'll be bought. Give you a small example of being bought. Rashmi Sawant, who was treated so disgracefully, She had done absolutely nothing. She had simply innocuously advertised her faith. That this is what I believe. And look what happened to her. A Bengali academic, a historian, began a campaign. The same historian, he says, I'm looking forward to China attacking India. Same man, Mr. Sarkar, Abhijit Sarkar. Nothing has happened to him. There have been a lot of protests. Nobody has touched him. These people are protected. They will never be touched. But I will tell you what happened to me. Just not everything, but a little bit. Just after Jaswant Singh, who was then foreign minister, published his book Defending India, I held a launch in the London School of Economics, where I was still teaching. My department has 34 academics. Not a single one of them attended. They would not attend the book launch of a person working for a fascist Hindu government. This is when I woke up. I hadn't realized the scale of the animosity. Now, I'm talking to somebody who's a very famous author in India today, who has studied in Oxford, and he concurs with me after being here 1 year. They hate us so. This hatred is partly to do with a civilizational disjuncture. The civilizational disjuncture which is deeply, deeply rooted against pagans and polytheists. It is so deeply rooted, people are not aware of it. I have many friends who are secular, Catholics, white Americans, but they have the same default reaction. They don't want to know, but they're critics. This is what it's all about. The other thing was the geopolitics. Let me finish quickly so I get Jaggi to come in. The geopolitics. After the Cold War started, Pakistan became a good friend from 1955. It joined CENTO. It was useful. The Indians were recalcitrant. They wouldn't play the game. They befriended the Russians. But that's because Stalin sent us wheat in 1951, 50-51, which the Americans denied. Stalin, even in starving Russia, sent us wheat. The Americans said, we will stamp every delivery barrel with our national insignia. So India is not a country they've ever liked. They blamed 64, 65 on India. They sent their fleet to the Bay of Bengal and the British to the Arabian Sea to threaten us. India, again, as I've said before on your program, is a difficult customer. So by default, to vindicate India and all its evil works had to be criticized. That is why there were critics. Along with this is a parallel track. That is a long-term subversion pact. This is the program to convert India. Now, I'm told by my friends in Andhra Pradesh, it is 40% already. Church leaders are saying 40% is converted. Now, Nagaland was 2% in 1948. Nehru gifted that to the Reverend Michael Scott. That was the match. He gifted Nagaland and Mizoram to Christianity. Andhra is well on the way. They know if they acquire a constituency, it will be better than what the East India Company achieved. They will have people who are automatically loyal to foreign powers. We have seen that again and again. WikiLeaks revealed the truth about Kundakulam as to the American embassy orchestrating that because we were buying Russian nuclear reactors. So these two things have coincided. The other thing I would say in conclusion about the church, it is not Muslims who are protesting abroad. It is the church. The church and evangelists understand perfectly well they do not have the numbers to hold the Indian government to ransom. So whether it was Modi's visa being cancelled in 2002, it was by the church. It's they who proposed it be cancelled. He wasn't denied, by the way. It was already a visa he already had. They cancelled it. Same story now. They now see in the 10 years from 2004, they achieved huge gains. The biggest gain being Nepal, which Sonia Gandhi and the Indian MEA handed to them in a golden platter. The Prime Minister's wife has told me 32% of Nepal is Christian already. I think the game is over in Nepal. So this is aim in India, with the evangelists leading the charge. Islam is simply an ally. They will end up having a conflict as they're doing in Kerala today. But in the meantime, they are pushing hard because they have come so close, because they know that Hindu parties are having trouble getting more than 33% of the vote. Once Hindu parties fall below 25, they will never again win a national election. This 42% UP was a fluke, and that fluke will be challenged. So all the Indian academics abroad in the social sciences, history, philosophy, etc., are campaigning because that is their job, that is what they're paid for. The two professors I know, Bengalis in Columbia, will you be different if you were paid a salary of $300,000 a year and wonderful accommodation at knockdown prices? Will you dare, when you come from Calcutta and your father's income was 22,000 rupees? Will you be able to change that? Because you are, see, so this left-wing, right-wing debate in India is a nonsense. The left and the right are all used by foreign powers. Very often the left is used against the left. For example, the Naxalites were helped to destroy the CPM. The Naxalite was a CIA operation with Chinese help because China and the Americans were working closely together from 1969. So they wanted to use that to destroy the dominant Communist Party, CPM. And they did. The biggest number of casualties in West Bengal among the 5,000 killed were CPM workers. The American Consul General in Calcutta at the time was a friend of my father. He used to wear a dhoti. He wore a dhoti and spoke fluent Bengali. Let me stop at that score and let Jaggi have his view as
No,
well.
I agree with almost everything you say, except that CPM didn't get destroyed. It smashed the Naxals, and it ruled for 30 years. It's Mamta who's come and smashed them. But more importantly, and the next, we should get to the real topic that we have at hand. My real concern is that even from the point of view of our foreign policy, establishment and honing that. The government of India needs people, needs Indians who are good at understanding German society and polity, are good at understand. I mean, even Afghan. I don't know how many Indians learn Pashto or Dari. How many know Sinhalese? The government doesn't seem to encourage that specialization, which will enable our elite to understand the world and how to use the world to our advantage. The whole world is using us to their advantage. But this is something the government should be encouraging instead of sending their bloody IS officers to governance or whatever leadership programs. You remember the leadership programs Yale organized for political leaders, and they're constantly recruiting them, but they go to learn the same old nonsense. They do not really come back understanding the society that hosts them any better for for enhancing the ability of our government to deal with the world. I mean, I can't think of two big names that are specialists on American polity who are taken seriously internationally. I can't think of one good name who's taken seriously on German society and polity or history. And we can go on, or even Sri Lanka, leave alone anything else. So that said, let's come to the trap of South Asian identity to gag Hindu voices in Western academia. And it's happened in recent decades. Would you agree, Jaggi?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I got onto this game about 3, 4 years back when I was attending the that World Hindu Conference in Chicago. Suddenly, there was a group that called itself the South Asian Group, and they came. They got in. You were there also, where they created a ruckus in the conference by just clandestinely entering it and raising slogans and other things. The point is, why does a South Asian thing have to oppose a Hindu conference like that when they did no such thing when it comes Islamic conferences or evangelical? They don't disturb all that. They had to come only to disturb that. And the reason why they gave themselves the name of South Asian is they said in order to protect them from vindictive action by Hindutva activists is what they said. But the fact is, most of those background people are either self-loathing Hindus or they may be Khalistanis or some other
Or Christians.
minority religion people and things like that. More recently, I think Dr. Sen resigned from the India Israel group because I think they're using this. I think the reason why this South Asian thing helps is that it helps them in two ways. One is it submerges the Hindu identity and say that South Asia is the core area, even though geographically South Asia is indeed South Asia, but nobody answers to the identity called South Asian. There is no such thing. Secondly, they do this in order to hide the crimes of the other side. What happens, for example, why did the grooming scandal involving Pakistani gangs go unnoticed? And they were all called Asian gangs. They were never called Pakistani Muslim gangs, right? Why were they called Asians? Because then they can hide the identity of the perpetrators. So it helps them in two ways. One is hide the people who are actually perpetrating violence and atrocities against minorities and other, in fact in this case it was even English teenage girls, and pretend that the only oppressive regime there is Hindu, who then again by calling it South Asian they can include people who are actually anti-Hindu, Hindu-phobic voices. So it serves both purposes. Even in USA, when suddenly there was some I think movement against Chinese, something like that, they call them Asians, whereas they could have called them Chinese if they were the ones who were being discriminated against. I think this tendency to use South Asia as a catch-all to hide some crimes and then highlight some others and blame somebody, only a specific community for it, serves their purpose very well. And that's exactly what they're doing. I think it's high time we stopped using South Asia as anything more than a geographical construct, because it doesn't there is nobody, not one single person who answers to an identity called South Asian.
Jaggi, I would add to that by saying that um, in my growing years, there used to be Indian studies, uh, even in Western universities. The point is that this region that you rightly said, nobody says I'm South Asian, except as a political statement by folks only of the Hindu variety, not of any other. Now, this region used to be referred to as the Indian subcontinent.
Exactly.
It's gone. That's
It's
gone
gone.
from the vocabulary. Now it's South Asia because then we are at par with Pakistan, with Maldives, with Bangladesh, with every tiny little
Yeah.
island off the coast of India. Once you put it as South Asian, and secondly, as you said rightly, that it hides their sins because Pakistanis don't even run their restaurants in the name of Pakistan. They
They call it
invariably
Indian.
call it Indian restaurants. Bangladeshis will also call it Indian restaurants. Very few Bangladeshis will name their restaurants as Bangladeshi. It's always Indian. So at one level, they want to come under the umbrella, and at the same time, that umbrella they want to keep poking holes in so that the umbrella actually tears apart. What do you say to that, Gautam? And
Yeah.
when did the South Asian Studies Department, when was the first South Asian Studies Department set up as opposed to Indian Studies?
Well, the South Asian studies label, as you have just pointed out, is a way of putting India in its place, to downgrade India. But you are just part of a group of countries which are absolutely tiny compared to India, by and large. So this is just a way of an insult, which has become the norm. Now, on the question of grooming gangs, they go back to the 1990s, and it hasn't stopped, by the way.
Yeah, I know.
It's basically all to do with media management. But even to this day, yesterday, day before, as they are being arrested and convicted for crimes they committed 20 years ago, they are still being described in the national media as Asian. They are not described in Pakistan. Now, there are some brave people who are saying we must identify them correctly, if only to understand the cause. But the media won't do it. Now, that's very simple. People need to understand that British politics is now hostage to Islam.
Yeah.
Muslims control 75 to 80 seats. Now, the thumping majority Boris Johnson won in 2019 is about 80 seats. The Labour Party will never get to power without the Muslim vote, Pakistan vote, and they are obsessed with Jammu and Kashmir. So the Labour Party is a hostage, period. If they want to be in power, they have to play along. And the only problem is, even if I say, I understand you've got to say all these things, but you won't act like this. You see, the Muslim Pakistani political activists are not stupid. You will not be able to fool them with just sweet words. You will actually have to take policy action, which is why very correctly the Indian government declined to buy the Eurofighter, because spare parts would suddenly have stopped. There would have been pressure from Pakistan to the mosques, and the British government would have found an excuse, which is why we are very wary. Now, I'm getting alarmed at the scale of the collaboration between India and Rolls-Royce. I hope this is very carefully organized and managed, so we are able to basically take technology, pay for it, and manufacture in India. That we will not be dependent on key spare parts from abroad. However, the British know us better than we know ourselves. This is something we have to understand. The British know us better. They know who we are, our weaknesses. Now, they have organized a huge cohort of East African nations who are 99% loyal to the crown as their assets in India. These people have contacts, they have access, and they are lobbying very hard for Britain PLC. Now, of course, one thing has changed. India is much stronger and will be harder to bully. But we should go into this with our eyes open, because at every level that I see, there is some official hand. For example, I'll give you a very specific example. I don't know how many years ago, maybe 4 years ago, Makran Paranjape came to give a lecture at Queen Mary's College in London. I was there at the lecture hall about Indian politics and caste, etc. He actually gave a very fine lecture. I was expecting that it would fall flat, but it was actually a very thoughtful, analytically sound lecture based on data. And it was chaired by my friend. And what happened, there were some Maoists I knew from before who were sitting in the audience. They created a real ruckus in question and answer time. And to my amazement, Makram was extraordinarily civil, restrained, never raised his voice, answered everything thoughtfully, and the chair sat back. A complaint was lodged with the Vice Chancellor, and the institute which sponsored the talk was abolished. These were 3 or 4 Maoists, including somebody called Amrit Wilson, whom I've known since the 70s, a daughter who's an academic in SOAS, and her husband came and tried to create a fuss. Such is the power. Such is the power of these marginal groups, and this power only exists because they have official connections. A lot of these so-called
official connections with the government of India, they get patronage within the government of India?
No, government of the UK.
Oh.
UK. Absolutely. I'll give you a stray example to illustrate how this works. Many, many years ago, I'm getting old now, there was a public lecture at which my late chairman, who was then actually just editor of the New York Review, you may have heard his name, Professor Fred Halliday, who was a very well-known Trotskyist, working with Tariq Ali, Perry Anderson, Meghnad Desai, etc. He later became a professor in Department. He was giving a public lecture. And while he was speaking, a Punjabi guy I knew very well, a Maoist, attacked him with a broom on the stage and hit him. Now, this Maoist was working for the police. They wanted to disrupt the Trotskyite meeting because the Trotskyites were the biggest danger. Because the Trotskyites attracted upper-class Brits who had access to jobs, policymakers. These were potential danger. Now, originally, they had backed the Trotskyites to stop them becoming pro-Soviets, because the Trotskyites hated the Soviets most of all. So the British establishment backed the Trotskyites to steer their young, influential, educated from pro-Soviet politics. But then they also disrupted them by they used a far-left group to attack the mainstream group. Now, British intelligence services and all of them around the world, they know their business. We are children compared to them. They have infiltrated us at every stage. And let me just say one more thing. There is nothing which happens in the UK with which I'm not somewhat familiar, because I am living it, eating it, studying it. Believe you me, every single Hindu organization, every single is infiltrated, every single one, from whatever dispensation. They are all reporting to the Home Office, to the police. They're all working because they all have skeletons in their cupboards. They're all subject to blackmail. And everybody wants an OBE and perhaps a membership of the House of Lords. We are bought for paltry rewards. So I trust no one. And I, in fact, have told our Prime Minister, please only listen to the High Commission, even if it means you don't want to talk to me. Don't listen to me. Now, the problem with the High Commission is this, is a general problem, the MEA, which Jaggi has already mentioned. Name me one joint secretary of the government of India of rank whose children, nephews, nieces are not in America on a scholarship or a part scholarship or a studentship. They are on holiday in India. Their focus is abroad. They will run to Oxford, which curses us. They will run to Oxford if they are invited immediately. If they're invited to a tea party, they will go there and speak. And yet in Oxford, every kind of anti-Indian activity takes place. The anti-CA protest in Oxford University was led by Indian students from India with the Pakistanis, the anti-CA protest. All of this has official backing from academics, from administrators. India is not the flavor of the month. They are only worried now for one thing, the surge of Indian economic transformation. And it's not Modi they hate. It's what he's doing to India to change it that really alarms them.
Okay. Now, on the one hand, you'd say, I mean, both of you pointed out how easy to buy and sell our academics, our intellectuals, public intellectuals, our media men are. I mean, that's what you were saying, that these governments find it easy to manipulate because they sell cheap. That's good. When you say, Gautam, we are harder to bully. That's why they don't like us. I would say it's the contrary. If anything, we are docile. Our intellectual elite, so called, our academics are docile. They never take up big pangas with the Western academia, and they go along quite meekly, and they do very well as intellectual coolies of the West. So actually, they have every reason to like us. Secondly, now, if you compare Hindus who make very peaceful citizens anywhere they go, they're never creating trouble, they mind their business, they go by the rules of the host society, they never try to change them any big way. Compare them to Islam. Islam is out to wreck even Western civilization. It's not as if it's made peace with the West from love jihad, sex jihad, womb jihad cases to which they are covering up in the Western societies. What do they gain by being pro-Islam? That completely baffles.
Actually, I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding. When I said we are hard to bully, I meant ultimately Indian state policy is not supine. We do not keel over and do what is required. Like the Pakistanis have never disobeyed the Americans. Never. India even disobeyed the Americans in 2012 over sanctions against Iran. India bought Russian jets after 63.
No,
despite
but the kind of...
So we are, as a government, we are a bit harder to bully. As for our academics and intellectuals, I'm sorry, they are call girls, overwhelmingly. I have no respect for them. They are bought and sold over the counter. Now, you're quite correct about what you say. We are very peaceful. I was just watching a program yesterday. The UK government is tracking 43,000 people who are potential terrorists. 43,000. Imagine the cost. 15% of Britain's prison population is Muslim. They are only 3.4% of the total population. And each prisoner costs 50 lakhs a year to keep, 50 lakh rupees a year. You know the number of Indians? The number is so small It doesn't register in the data. It is only a few hundred, and overwhelmingly for financial misdeeds. Some Punjabi Hindus for violence. So being peaceful doesn't pay, because you will never find this being discussed in the media. But the slightest issue in India will be on the BBC, CNN. Non-issue will be there, fabricated. Like this fellow Subhash Bose's grandnephew came out and said Modi is orchestrating wholesale assault against Christians. I mean, it is so blatantly false. What do you say? So our government needs to be a little bit harder. We have shown signs of being a bit harder for the first time since independence. There are some signs of us being harder. Now, our media is basically beyond the pale. There's nothing you can say. I'm seeing two individuals from the UK being interviewed on Khalistan issues from the UK. Both of them work for the UK government. So they're
Jaggi,
giving
what do
a
you
UK. Sorry?
make of it? No, I said, Jaggi, what do you make of it? We should be actually more likable, treated with greater respect. But that's not happening to us. I mean, an occasional successful scientist might, IT geniuses might get to be head of Google or this or that. But in the ultimate analysis, we still act as their intellectual pulleys. We play
Yeah,
by the rules that they create. So, what is
yeah,
it that makes them go for Islam, pitch for Islam, which is actually dangerous, and Muslims, which are going to smash the Western civilization and will smash all that Britain thinks it's proud of? And why would they be anti us? We are no threat to them.
Can I make a quick response to that, Madhu? Quick response before I
yeah,
interrupt. In the case of Islam, if you look from the 30s onwards, Islam was used ruthlessly against secular Arab nationalism. So that's one reason. They've used Islam again and again against secular Arab nationalism in Iraq, in Syria, elsewhere. Two, oil politics came in big time after the 70s. And three, Islam is their only ally in India. That's why. Islam is something very useful in India because they can hold hostage our government hostage, and they've just shown that.
yeah.
CAA, they've shown that. They can hobble the most powerful government. Sorry, Jack.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the advantage Islam has is it either through sheer force and physical intimidation and thing, it is able to dhimify most governments. They have dhimified the whole of the West also, where anything you say about Islam is considered Islamophobia. Why? I mean, and even people like who are critical of Islam are put into a category called Islamophobia and left at it, no matter how good or great their scholarship, whether it's a Bill Warner or a Robert Spencer, whatever it is, they call that. The same problem happens here. If you look at the way our government has behaved, it is not. I mean, it is busy doling out all kinds of scholarships and special things for minorities, and minorities, according to the constitution, are both linguistic and this thing. But I don't see any linguistic minorities being helped by the minority ministry. It is only one category of people who get all the scholarships and benefits and all that. And after all that, they still get kicked in the butt by the same minority which wants to see the back of this government or anybody. So our government has been completely dhimified. It cannot do even what even it saw in the case of the CAA anti-CAA protests, that a simple thing to help people from Bangladesh, and even that only those who had already crossed over by December 14, to give them early citizenship, not to deny anybody. This was made into a huge anti-Islam law where Muslims are going to be thrown out of India, and that kind of narrative was created. And our government, to this day, 2 years afterwards, is still not able to frame rules for CAA. It's a dead law because one community has managed to dhimify the government. It is now scared of its own shadow about doing anything. So I think when a government acts like this with so much, fear about what will this community think about it and what will the international community think about its actions, then automatically even you haven't done basic things. I mean, you could have created so many academies where you promoted certain kinds of scholarship, you could have found on them, but you're still funding the JNUs and even private universities like Ashoka are become totally woke. I mean, where more noise is made about the exit of a Bhanu Mehta than about the kind of foolish scholarship that they generate. So let's be clear. Islam's basic attitude is to dhimify whoever comes in contact with them. So over a period of time, they self-censor themselves and start behaving like dhimmis. And that is exactly what they've achieved in the West. They're achieving the same in India. And unfortunately, there is no cure for this unless we say, like hell, I am going to defend my interest. I am not against you. I am not against Muslims, but I do have a problem with Islam, which has first actually colonize Muslim minds, and the colonized minds then try to colonize the rest. That's the way it works. It's called psychology displaced aggression. If you are abused in childhood, most likely you will become an abuser when you're an adult. So this is what has happened to all the Muslims who have been abused into believing that Islam is the only thing and that they have to do certain kinds of things in order to make Islam win. And now they are perpetrating the same intimidation tactics against the rest of the world, and they're succeeding. Unfortunately, I don't know how this is going to change till enough Muslims realize that this is a road to hell for the whole world. And I think there are a lot of them who are becoming ex-Muslims, but they're still afraid to come out and say that there are some things fundamentally wrong with Islam. I think Professor Balagangadhara wrote a simple thing that India was colonized by two things. One is it was colonized by Islam, not Muslims, but and it was colonized by British, right? So one was a colonial administration, the other was a religion that colonized it. So that is where I think he's made a difference between two types of colonization, because the Muslims didn't come here to loot; they came to rule and to colonize us in a different way, as opposed to the way the British were. They came to loot and get money out of India and send it back. They didn't come to settle. But the Islam came to settle here and take over this country. That is what it is.
Absolutely.
I just make one point in connection with what you just said, Jaggi. Yes, gamification seems to be widespread, but
Yeah.
there is profound complicity of our society and our state. I was
Yes.
shocked to hear yesterday from a friend in Delhi, a very highly placed VHP person, that both Swara Bhaskar and Siddhartha Vardarajan, who was a student in LSE when I was teaching there, lecture to IFS trainees. Swara Bhaskar. That astonished me. So we are actually fully complicit in our behavior, but I see some little ray of hope from the way Himanta Biswas in Assam and
Yes.
Yogi Adityanath have acted in UP,
Absolutely.
and it is not such a big challenge to do it. I
It's
was
not
very
challenging.
impressed by Himanta Biswas' argument against madrasas, that the
Yes.
children want to be doctors and engineers, and that's what I'm going to help them to be.
That's right.
So this is possible, but I have great sympathy for the administration in Delhi because I think they are constrained in many more ways than one realizes, and
Yeah.
they have done more in the last 7 years than one could have dreamt of. So I forgive many things that I would
Yeah.
wish they had done. The only thing I'm demanding of them now, which may be coming, please free our temples and
Yeah.
let them be run by the community. That's the one thing. And the other, which Madhu and you and I all agree, make a start with changing the school and university curricula, the
Yeah.
narrative, which is so ghastly. And it can be done. It will take 5 to 7 years. And I
Yeah.
have on my laptop, the one I'm speaking on, a full program of how to make a start without creating waves to gently and determinedly alter this nexus and bypass JNU, Jadavpur College, Presidency, TIS, Ashoka. Ashoka
Yeah.
is a foreign body in India's society. All of
Right.
this can be bypassed and it won't cost the earth.
Yeah.
No, no,
Okay.
it will not cost the earth. If anything, it will save a lot of money because you will be actually producing people who use their brains once they're educated. Right now, we are producing lumpenized youth who are deracinated, who are totally lumpenized and can't really fend for themselves. They are unemployable. So I don't think it's going to cost a lot. It's going to save a lot of money if we started producing self-respecting Indians with skills. The point that I'd like to, you keep going over it again and again, how things have changed, how things have changed. But Gautam da, yes, in some ways, but it's mainly the development agenda which is more efficient. The clean water supply, very efficient. Modi ji has done a great job. Housing for the homeless, he's trying to do a good job there as well. Health insurance for the poor, the totally unprotected, subsidy going straight into the bank. But actually, you don't know how much of it is actually being cornered by illegal Bangladeshis, illegal Rohingyas. The very same forces are actually cornering bulk of it meant for the hapless ones. They're cornering bulk of it and sabotaging at the same time. They're not even grateful. They don't think it's a favor the government is doing or that the government even deserves a word of appreciation. If anything, they start kicking again. So I would say that even your development agenda is not well targeted towards those because anti-Brahmanism continues to be rampant and allowed to go haywire despite the fact that today the most unprotected groups, I'm not a Brahmin, thank God, and you are, both of you, but average Brahmin is so unprotected and so vulnerable. They completely left out of so many benefits that the non-Brahminical or the so-called lower castes get or the minorities get. There's nothing done to actually bridge this divide. If anything, it's been sharpened. The Supreme Court, for example, had very categorically warned the government that the SC/ST Act is a lawless, draconian piece, which is, they called it legal terrorism, I think. And they said, please fix it because through it, you are actually driving such a wedge that people are becoming afraid of social contact with groups that can use the SC/ST Act. And this has been a Christian agenda, the NGOs that brought this law. Now, the Modi government was given an opportunity to fix it. Instead, Modi government made it stronger. Similarly, in the case of education, see the problems that we're talking about, the South Asian identity you being used to gag Hindu voices. It's because we're being gagged in our own country, first and foremost. If we were strong in our own country and the gatekeepers here were not the Break Up India forces, they are the gatekeepers for all jobs, then very soon all these jokers who come with their Harvard and whatever degrees doing Hindu bashing, they would be unemployable in India. And they would then lose their prestige. If they become unemployable, nobody wants them. What will they do? How many jobs can they get? Their whole purpose is to be planted here as gatekeepers, as manipulators, and the government has done nothing. There's not too much you had to do. Modi ji, all it
I,
had
I,
to do
I,
was
I should
good talent hunt, put the right people in the right positions, and let them do it. I mean, even when he decided to do national education policy rehaul, an 85-year-old bureaucrat was chosen to reform the curriculum. I mean, can you think of anything more absurd? And it goes on the same way over and over and over again. And for HRD, you don't even bring in people that actually have that burning passion to change things. The Ministry of Culture, it's as good as dead today. At least the lefties used to do a lot with it. Modi government has completely crashed it.
Can I make a couple of points, Madhuji?
So, 8,
Uh,
10.
First of all, I should warn you, Madhuji, beware about knocking Harvard. We are going to have a Chief Justice before 2024 who's a Harvard product, so be wary about knocking Harvard. You know, the
I would, if I had the power, I would ban for the next 50 years Indians going and studying abroad in any of the humanities. Science, ठीक है, वो करके आ
on,
जाओ.
on, on the
I would
on
just
the
ban completely.
on the question of Brahmins, I think we need to understand something very profound. The Brahmin issue is actually the other side of the caste coin. Basically, the Brahmin and caste issue are two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, it is.
Now, for all the adversaries of India, caste is the key for controlling India.
Yeah.
If people vote in accordance with caste loyalties, no government with a nationalist agenda can emerge. Now, for the first time, Modi has shown in UP there's a glimmer of hope. And this is very alarming for everybody, that people are not going to vote in accordance with caste loyalties. Now, we should not underestimate this achievement, that for the first time, the caste alliances were breached. And this is a threat to all our adversaries because they know we can't invade India, but if we keep the caste narrative alive, fund research on caste, keep repeating it in every newspaper, that is the least we can do. That's one. Now, let me give you an argument from the government side, as if I'm speaking on behalf of the government. That may be the wrong argument, but this is what I can say, might say, that any profound change in our society and culture will bring forth the wrath of all our adversaries, particularly the US and Europe. Anything they see as a profound change. So let India become economically stronger so that we can withstand this assault. And believe you me, from what little I have known of Modi, he thinks long. He truly thinks long. And I know one or two areas in which he has done things which are astonishing, that he could be so far-sighted. For example, the sanctions against Pakistan occurred because of Modi visiting Washington and going to see policymakers. You didn't see anybody in the media. The ex-ambassador said he was astonished that Modi wanted to see all these policymakers. And that was initiative. Now, this man thinks long, and he may rightly have decided, I'm not going to rock the boat. Let India become economically much stronger and able to withstand. You can be sure there'll be sanctions against India. Now, between 4 and 2014, India's economy basically collapsed. We were heading for a major financial crisis. If you just read the mint articles of my friend Anand Nageshwaran, you will see what a serious problem we were facing. Now, Modi pulled us out of that. What we are going through is a period of transition, and that transition is disruptive and costly. It will lead to lower growth, but that is the preparation for the future. Modi may have thought that I am going to first prepare the Indian economy, but I don't deny him something more general, which must be clear to everybody. There is a change in the cultural atmosphere. There is no change in the official policy that I would approve, curriculum particularly, but overall, there is a shift in the center of gravity. Now, we have a window of opportunity of 25 years, which is in our favor, and the BJP needs to wake up. India is going to have 600 million people living in cities by 2030. This is the urban constituency which has severed its caste loyalty somewhat, which cares
So
about good governance. This 600 million cohort will be the solid base on which to build our national identity, which no leader has tried to do. So I have to say, I feel much less inclined to get angry with all the failings.
no, I think it's our differing perspectives on what are his failings and strong points. I
Yeah.
think both I and Jaggi agree that he has many strong points, and we celebrate them. Jaggi has been as vocal as I have been whenever we notice those strong points. But even with regard to the economy, let's face it, demonetization was disastrous. Similarly, lockdowns, completely unnecessary, completely unnecessary. And we are getting smashed completely without any cause. Covaxin. I mean, he's become a brand ambassador for Covaxin. Why? He's putting his entire prestige on stake on this mumbo jumbo called vaccination against this and that virus and new strain and then ever new strains. All you had to do was to rely on good old Ayurveda, to tell people how to strengthen their immunity, to guide them through that, give them clean water, give them clean and non toxic food, arrange for that. We are eating poison. Instead, vaccine has gone bananas over it, vaccinating even kids. Its consequences could be disastrous. I don't think that's being taken into account. Now, the point that I'm trying to make is this: the Inspector Raj is back. Ease of doing business cannot coexist with Inspector Raj. And strong economy requires rules being so simple and the processes being. I don't think our lives are today any easier. At least, for the poor, yes. For the people who depend on subsidies, yes. Their quality of life, I'm glad, has improved. Nobody's grudging them clean water, gas cylinders, this, that, and the other. But I'm sorry, the lives of the rest of us, are they any better? No, I would say. And most importantly, the kind of aggression with regard to breaking up India we are witnessing, the amount of time, money it's now going to take to just manage law and order, and failing at that. You need a yogi like approach if you want law and order. You cannot be succumbing to Singhu border and Shaheen Bagh and all that. The cost of that is enormous, Gautam Da. So please don't overlook that. The good points we salute him for. It's certainly, for example, better defense preparedness, no doubt. Emphasis on Make in India with regard to our armament industry, so we're not dependent. Those are very major initiatives. But the economy, no, I'm sorry, I'm not as hopeful as you are. And there are visible signs that wrong mistakes. But I want to come back to South Asian Studies Department. When was the first one created? And who took the initiative? It's like, when did women's studies become gender studies? Or when did NGOs become CSOs? Or one can track these changes in nomenclature. Can any one of you, either of you, tell me, when did Indian studies become South Asian studies? And where did this push? Yes, Jagin.
No, I think it was partly a response to talk about Orientalism, that Edward side and all. If you see, from Negroes they became blacks, and then from blacks they became Afro Americans, right? So that process of renaming the same thing in order to make it more politically correct is part of the American academic trend, and we have seen that all over the place. So this South Asia, Asian, and all was happening because earlier we were, Asia was Near East, Far East. Once all these studies shifted from continental Europe and Britain to USA, they started getting renamed as West Asia, East Asia, South Asia, in terms of geographical things, which seem more neutral. What has happened is these terms now are malleable enough to serve their own foreign policy purposes. And that is where the thing, if it were merely geographical terms, it's okay. But they are now using these geographical terms in order to pursue a state policy that is fundamentally Hindu-phobic and meant to contain our growth and make sure that we don't become economically more powerful, where we can say, go to hell, we'll do what is in our interest. We're not yet there. But I think we need another 5 to 10 years of a government that is truly nationalist to enable this change, so that you can confidently make the change and say, look, you guys, you don't have to run Indology departments, we will do so. If you want, you can send your scholars here to study here. We'll have somebody like Rajiv Malhotra to oversee all these guys or select them. We will see that some other people who we trust will do this thing. We will create Shankaracharya institutes, just like the Chinese create Confucius institutes in the US to influence sinology studies in the US and influence policy. So we need that change in power structures to happen, So one more thing where I slightly disagree with you, Madhu, is I think all the economic emphasis at the bottom of the pyramid is actually good for us from a
Yeah,
long-term sense.
I
Because
agree.
no, what happened? No, no. It's also, see, if you actually see this whole Mandal politics and all that, though it was seen as a contrast to the Hindu politics of Kamandal stuff. Actually, once that other backwards classes became mainstream, actually that is when Hindutva also became mainstream. If you see, all the new leadership is coming from there. So logically, helping the bottom of the pyramid expands the Hindu identity to some extent. Till of course there will be those Bangladeshi infiltrators who may all be benefiting from it, but helping the neo middle class to emerge and urbanize actually will help the thing. After a certain minimum level of economic benefit is a thing, that then you identity issues begin to matter to you more, which is where I think it was, then it will be less easy to divide people on the base of caste, because now you have outgrown the basic need to grab onto caste in or as the only thing you have. So once your economic, I think he's doing the thing in a long term thing. Demonetization certainly was a mistake, but subsequently I think he's managed to correct it. And I think we are going to be digital powers. And we are actually, we've got a very good system going, and I think we have managed to reach the last mile through digital technology. In this pandemic, for example, without that, we would not be able to put 500 rupees in the pocket of every woman in rural areas with one click of a button. Bench there. The USA was busy writing checks for their poor people during the pandemic in 2020. We did it in one day, one shot. So we are far ahead of the Western in terms of financial technology, digital massification, and digital reach, which I think Modi has done the right thing. It's laying the ground. Today, actually, a beggar is using UPI. I mean, saying, you please give me money through the UPI app so that I get directly credited to my account. So I think there are certain benefits that have flown from Modi's digitization,
Fully
which has
agree.
actually reached the last mile. So I think
Yes,
demonetization itself
I,
was a problem, but today that
there
same
I'm with
small
you.
guy,
There
today
I'm
the
with
same
you.
small guy will is part of the formal ecosystem. After we have gone through a trial by fire, they're coming back into the ecosystem.
well,
Except that
I would.
lockdown. No, two more things quickly.
Yeah,
Um, and this is something that I would like to wind up with. See,
yeah,
we talked about the trap of South Asian identity to gag Hindu voices. To my mind, even the Indian identity is a trap, because
yeah,
under the Indian identity, you have all these Owasis. They are Indian too, right? The missionaries who want to convert the entire Joshua project agenda. The Islamists who want Darul Islam, they are also Indians. I think we have to. It's good that, for example, names of our cities have been changed. Allahabad is Prayag and Banaras is Kashi. But I think India now needs to be put to sleep, and we have to be Bharatiya identity, because that will define us better. This Indian identity is deracinated. It's not the name we gave ourselves, it's a name the others gave us. India, for example. And to my mind, the moment we start emphasizing on not India, that is Bharat, it's like an afterthought. Bharat as a primary identity, the moment you do that, then the Hindu identity starts finding its due space. So
I
even
would say,
India,
Madhu, I'm very sympathetic to this idea, and this is the underlying cultural change which is gathering force gently, not as quickly as we would like, but it is there. Again, I come back to the need for the narrative to change. It takes about 15 years for people to do PhDs and become professors and then start teaching. Now, JNU has captured this market. The radicals create the PhDs who then go out and teach everywhere. We can cut this in half in no time if the government so wished. By the way, the first South Asia Studies department was in Berkeley in 1959, funded by Ford Foundation.
I knew
1959.
that. I knew it was coming. That's why I was egging you on. Yes.
South Asia Studies happened in Berkeley, 1959,
Ford
funded by
Foundation
Ford.
funded.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's a giveaway. But I would say something which I'm noticing even sitting abroad. Indians are becoming somewhat unconcerned about what people say abroad about them. That's a good thing. When I talk to
Yeah.
my Indian friends and I WhatsApp them, they say, "Who cares?" Which is very healthy. And I'll give you one other indication of somebody who was not himself aware of the contribution he's making, not fully anyway, Amish Tripathi.
Huh.
His narrative in small town India is creating a cohort of people who are conscious of their past, their culture, and proud. And Amish is being read by millions. Now, all these are good things. When it will all come together, it has to be coordinated. For example, all these Chinese studies departments all over the world, they don't have a leg to stand on without talking to the Chinese institutions. The Chinese institutions take the lead. You can be as big a scholar as you like in Harvard, but you're nobody if you're not coordinating with some of their Tsinghua, Beijing, and top universities. Because the real work is done there, the materials are all there, the funding is all there. I'll give you one small example how the Chinese operate. This field medal winner, Chinese professor in Harvard, went to China, Beijing, and went to see, I don't know which president it was, and said, we can become the top power in mathematics in the world. And the president said, fine. It took them 10 years to become the second most important power in mathematics. And we were far ahead. And we have nothing. We have TIS and we have nothing. We need policy, intelligent policy. Our mathematicians, our geniuses are all being kicked out because of reservation policy and they're out in the United States. US is very, very happy that our best brains are there. They are not politically threatening. They work quietly. They earn money. But if you look at the numbers of people not in the top positions, look in NASA, look in the science institutes full of clever Indians. And we are training them at our
Clever
cost.
Indians or clever Hindus? Clever Indians or clever Hindus?
99% Hindus. 99%.
But
99% Hindus. But you're
Hindus
right.
or
I want our country to be called Bharat. I'm so glad that you're mentioning this. This is something which will
Yeah.
be very good for
Absolutely.
us.
Absolutely. I think that's a topic of India that is Bharat, which is Bharat that is India needs to, that you need to reverse the
Bharat,
game.
that was for a while called India.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I don't want to be trapped in the Indian identity either.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Really, because it's a
Yeah.
truncated identity, it's a forced identity, and it's an identity where anybody can draw a line on the map anytime, push you out, as they did from Kashmir. I don't want that identity at all. I want to own all of that Bharat. At least be aware, because at
Yeah.
least it will make the younger generation, coming generations aware. What was the map of Bharatvarsh? And unless you connect to that, you cannot have any sense of geopolitical, uh, what shall I say, vigilance,
Yeah.
um, how we are shrinking. That needs to be understood. Most of our
Yeah.
young people say, oh, but we are still 100 crore. Yes, but
Yeah.
look at the territory, it's shrinking. But how could we have survived if we were being pushed and converted? See, we are 100 million still. Yes, but look at the expense we lost. And that awareness will come only when we connect ourselves to Bharatvarsh and
Yeah.
its history, its heritage, all that will come. India actually only reminds me of British India and colonial India. And I do not wish to be
That's
a
right.
Agreed.
citizen, not
Agreed.
even a disloyal citizen of the British Empire. I'd rather connect to that heritage, that legacy. And I think it'll change my self view very fast. And then I will refuse to fit into South Asian studies department. I'll insist, please, Bharatiya studies career.
Yeah. Yeah. Correct.
Fantastic. Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
last,
Great.
I'll ask you to wind up. What would you do if we had to make that trip? Three things that both of you would suggest we start with. with or without the government? And then we'll wind up.
No, no, I think the first thing is all the people and Hindu intellectuals who um, agree or broadly agree to be on the same trajectory. I think we need to make sure that we don't neutralize each other over small issues of ideology where we come and destroy one another just because we disagree on, say, one aspect. So we have to create a thing where we say that the broad trajectory we are. See, we don't have to rubbish, say, somebody like the RSS or the VHP merely because we think some of them sound foolish. Huh? Okay, that it is true, but I think at the end of the day, in some ways they are co-travelers. You can't do that. Second thing, I think we need to privately fund a whole lot of research, and I don't think it costs a lot of money. There are so many businessmen with thousands and thousands of crores giving 10, 20, 50, 100 crores for doing academic research. If you wanted to replace, for example, the entire school textbooks in history, it will not cost us more than 10 crores, because it's so easy. The information, the data is already available. If you get a Meenakshi Jain to write for medieval history, and if you get some Danino to write something else, I mean, five guys can write the complete history curriculum in 2 or 3 years, and it won't cost more than 5-10 crores. And that is not beyond private initiative. I mean, we don't need Javadekar or the education minister, HRD minister to come and say, yeah, here's 100 crores, let's change the curriculum. We change the curriculum first on a private basis and then make it an added chapter or extra reading in schools, and then change it when the time comes that is right. So we don't need to wait for the government to act. The last thing is, I think geopolitically, we have to do in the next decade what China did from the 1980s. That is, lie low and don't maintain a very high global profile. Wait till you are a $5 to $10 trillion economy and then raise your head. Till that time, I think it's better for us to nod our heads and do what is right rather than start speaking up loudly in thing and start where our enemies wake up faster than our own people. We should
Mm.
not wake up
And
our
put us in
enemies.
jail. Mm.
Yeah, yeah. So those are the three things I would do. Of course, there are many other things, but like, of course, things like freeing temples, 100 things that Hindus have to do. But three broad things that I feel we can do without necessarily getting the government into the picture. I think these are the things we should do.
You, Gautam, you want to wind up with 3 suggestions?
I agree with Jaggi on most of the things he has said. We have to change the narrative, whether it's privately funded or otherwise, is not important. But ultimately, the government has to take a decision.
Yeah,
It can be done quite quickly. There are enough scholars. It will take a couple of years to produce good quality work. That's the one thing. I think, changing people's view of themselves and the world they live in, because we don't know who we are. We don't have a sense of our identity. And I talk to so many people in their 60s, 50s, who repeat things which have been published in Indian newspapers, things which are demonstrably false. So we need to change the narrative. I am a great believer now in the freeing of temples because our temples, the great temples were places of learning. Worship was an afterthought in Sardapi, in many other places. These are essentially places of great scholarship, which is what our whole entire Vedic view of the world was, which was validated emphatically by the Adi Shankaracharya. So we need to do this now. Uh, we have put forward a paper to the government, actually. I can now
yeah,
reveal 18
yeah,
months ago, proposing how we may begin. It has to be done carefully. I'm afraid even the person to whom I am known and have good ties did not respond. But it was delivered to him to 3 different places, so it got it. So temple freeing is a big deal.
yeah.
This will begin. And you see, a vibrant Hinduism will stop the conversion racket. People need to see something visible. They need to see something visible because it is about symbols and a great upsurge. Now that is the
Not
second.
symbols, support systems. People go to the church and the mosque because those are centers of support,
Absolutely.
financial, emotional, intellectual, social, networking, bonding, protection. And our temples, you, as of now, you only go to go do darshan and buy your own prasad and namaste. That's it.
And the third thing is my little private hobby horse, which I will try and attempt next year, well, no, later this year. We're going to set up a website with careful analysis of which products Hindus should boycott.
Yeah.
So every advertiser in the New York Times will get a message. Every advertiser. Now we are disempowered. We feel nobody listens to us, but we have our private purchasing power, and we are a big enough market of at least 200 billion major buyers. And I want to have a website which will not cost a lot of money, where we will highlight the reasons for which product is to be boycotted for Times of India or any other product. So Hindus will use their wallet to hurt our enemies. And the government will also take notice. Because you make your money on the last 10, 15% of turnover. That's where you make your money. So even being hurt 10%, people will not like. The bottom line is what matters to them, and they will then listen. Because a lot of it is to do with money. And that's what I'd like to do later this year.
Yes.
Thank
Great.
you. Good luck with this great project. And I'm sure it's going to catch on very well, because each one of these campaigns for boycott of this or that has actually worked thus far.
Yeah.
So this is bound to work.
I hope to have your support.
My own list.
Absolutely.
I have my own list. Ji. Okay, with these words, viewers, I won't be able to take any of your questions. Amia, I saw your question about Atrocities Act and how to counter it by reversal. I don't think that's the answer. We'll discuss it another time very soon, how to handle that problem. I don't want to give a casual answer or a terse answer for what I consider is one of the most serious challenges facing India today. So thank you, Jagdeep. Thank you, Gautam Da. And thank you, viewers. Before you leave, please do share, like, subscribe, and support our channel. Namaste.
Namaste.
Shubhratri. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind.